as you know, we have the wonderful Michael Bartura with us today, talking to us about building a day-to-day gratitude practice. Michael has decades of management experience across sectors in 4 continents. He has, experience in mindfulness practices and delivers insightful and engaging training seminars and group work through non-denominational science-based methodologies. He runs his own coaching practice based on mindfulness-based leadership and positive neuroplasticity to work with individuals, organizations, and startups, which is exactly why I've asked him to be here today. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to get into the nitty-gritty, but I guess I'd just first love to know what exactly you think gratitude is, Michael.
Okay, so let's jump to it. I'm going to share my screen. Hi, everyone. It would be lovely if you do want to turn your videos, but totally get it if you don't. It's stay at home, so some people haven't been to the hairdresser for a while. Let's just share my screen so I can show you what I would like to talk to you about. Right. Okay. Can you see my screen? You can. Okay. So when we look, sorry, I'll just organize all the little menus that you get while doing that because they get a bit tricky. Here we go. Right. Okay. So first and foremost, I want to welcome you all and take the opportunity to acknowledge traditional owners from the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and thank the elders, past, present, and emerging. And in the context of today, I also want to point out something in terms of gratitude, I think, which is relevant. So one of the interesting things about, of course, the traditional owners is that this is the Earth's oldest culture. And all the evidence suggests, some people say even more, but all the evidence suggests that there's been a continuous culture going on for about 60,000 years with the traditional owner. And so just by way to kind of clarify or maybe sharpen this gratitude, thanking and acknowledging traditional owners, I just want to give you a little bit of a reference point. So if you look at the research around civilization, and civilization is defined or clarified as a society that reaches social and cultural development, sort of advanced stage of social and cultural development or organization. If you look at the average length of a culture as such, of a civilization, it's about 340 years, right? And if you look at the longest 4 examples that we have in our history, we're talking between 850 and 1,000 years. One in Mesoamerica, so that's the Olmec, couple in North Africa, and one over in India. And so if you take that and compare it to what we've had here in Australia, we might not see the hallmarks of what we would call advanced civilization in terms of big inventions and machinery, but certainly in terms of social and cultural development, they were very intricate, very developed. They had over 28 different group of languages. There was a whole wandering patterns and nomad sort of meetings that happen all around the country. So I think in some ways when we acknowledge them, there's a sort of a place for us to be grateful for, keeping this place so well for so many years, and maybe we can learn from them into the future. Certainly in fire management, traditional fire management, and general cultivation of the land, they seem to have done a lot better than we do. So I think that's a sort of a nice way to start this conversation. I want to give you a couple of frames, maybe 3 frames in terms of how we're going to do this. So the first is, please, we're going to do a little bit of sharing and of course, without needing to explain it too much, this idea of discretion, right? What is said here and shared here, please stay in this session as such. And the next thing is an invitation for you to be vulnerable and authentic in that, right? Because what you'll find is that growing, changing, learning happens in the places where we're a little bit uncomfortable. And to be uncomfortable, the quickest way for us to do is just to wear those 2 hats. If we behave authentically and we do it in a vulnerable way, we usually are uncomfortable. The last thing is that I want to invite you to use your phone on a tool that I'll use in the conversation. So this is called menti.com, and if you go if you go to menti.com and you'll see a window at the top of the website that comes up, you can punch these numbers 7161958, and you should be able to see the first slide. Don't just answer it just yet. We'll go into it in a second. You can also use the QR code, or if you really get stuck, that code at the bottom. But does anyone please just flag up if you have any issues with that, or send a message in the chat. Kate, if you don't mind to check out the chat, that would be great. I just see that there's a lot more participants. Ooh, okay. I need to admit them, right? Just a sec. Okay, admit all. Sorry, there's still people joining. I have to run that spiel a little bit over again. What's the time? I definitely think that we should start. Okay. Hi everyone. Those who just joined in, you kind of missed the spiel, so I'm going to give it to you very quickly again, just in terms of like, you know, I invite you to use discretion and be vulnerable and authentic in terms of how we share today. And I also would like to use a tool called Mentimeter. So if you go to menti.com and use those numbers to get in, to punch at the top, there's a little window. You should be able to see the first slide there. Don't just use it yet. We'll get to it. But that's a tool that we'll use 3 or 4 times. Any questions on this so far? Okay, I'll assume that that's good. I'll just keep checking participant in case someone else comes. Okay, so let's start. Let's look at gratitude in terms of like the official version, right? So if you go and check out what does gratitude, you know, sort of is defined, it points out 2 things: the quality of being thankful, as in we actually are being thankful for something, and a readiness to show appreciation for and return kindness. In other words, the first thing that comes out of it, of course, is that it has an element of relationship to a degree, right? Relationship with the outside world, not necessarily a person, because we can be thankful for something rather than someone, but certainly there is a relationship between us and the outside world. And so go to that slide that I've just given you and just type in, and you can type more than one answer. What does gratitude mean to you, right? And what I'll do is I'll share again, but I'll share this time the results of the answers as they come in. So you should be able to see on your screen now, as people are punching in, what is gratitude for you. You can put, you know, whatever it is that is relevant for you. You can also point out specific things that you might be grateful for, like your kids or your, you know, having an income at the moment is definitely worth being grateful for. And if I didn't make it clear, this is totally anonymous. So you can put in, you know, anything, except they do have apparently they do have some sort of a filter, so you can't swear in it. That's what I'm told. I've never tried it. They obviously had that problem for a while because they've installed that. So that was quite funny. So we're seeing stuff like being thankful, appreciative, appreciating what I have, being conscious of how lucky I am, have the friends and the family. What else? A few more people, maybe 2 or 3 more people. Couple more people want to try? I'll be very grateful. Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. What's interesting though is that you look at the motives that coming through, and oh, here we go. The motives that are coming through are basically sort of being being thankful for what I have. So we'll talk more about that. Let's just park that for a sec. But I just want to point it out. Being clear on what I have in my life, being conscious of how lucky I am to have what I have, being open and available as well as thankful. That's a good one. Okay. So I'm going to stop share. Kate, back to you.
Well, I guess I have a question for you, which is, what does the science say around gratitude? So aside from, obviously, we all can kind of, I guess, talk about it from an emotional point, but yeah, what does the science say?
Okay. So I'll share my screen again and we'll get into that. So if we want to look at the science, we have to go back in time, right? To start with. So let's travel back into sort of like the birth of our, our evolution as a species. And what you'll find is that for the last 250,000 years, we've evolved relatively very fast in terms of like the way that our brain grew and the way that our social interactions, our culture, our ability to use tools. Most of it happened in the last 150,000 years. And of course, it keeps accelerating. So about 100,000 years ago, we've invented language, maybe 100 to 70,000 years ago. And throughout that time, regardless of our evolution in terms of how well we could function, and just to give you an idea of how well we could function, if you take a Homo sapiens child, say from 50,000 years ago, very early on in life, and somehow adopted them out to a modern family, the understanding or the thought is that there's all the chances that she or he would be able to function just as a normal adult in our society, right? So a lot of what was happening in the last 50,000 years was us discovering how to use the neural kind of capacity, the hardware that we have here, and keep developing and accelerating that development. And we can see that very, incredibly so in the last 20 years with the advance of the age of information and technical development. But nevertheless, in terms of what we have here, that's been there for a long time, and it's been wired in a very particular way. And we have to pay attention to that, because underneath our ability to be present and helpful and mindful and grateful, there is a wiring that was meant for one thing and one thing only. And that is kind of like the number one law in nature, which is basically eat lunch, don't be lunch. And why this is important is because we have to understand that our wiring is there to help us survive, not to make us feel better, not to make us achieve our potential, not to, sort of be creative in this kind of artistic way that we might want to do to express ourselves. But really the wiring is first and foremost, is there to avoid being someone else's lunch, so to speak. And an interesting sort of point of reference in this is that they've done what they've done is that they build a computer model of surviving, the way that the brain will address surviving issues. And then they'll look at running that patterns, that algorithm for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of times. And what they discover is that the brain has no interest whatsoever to understand reality. Only in about 0.0 something % of the results, there was the model suggested that the brain was interested in understanding reality. All the other times, the only thing it was interested with is our survival. And that makes it very tricky for us, because we have this innate mechanism in us that is basically looking for what's going to go wrong, right? If you think in terms of survival, the difference between anticipating what's going to go wrong and it doesn't go wrong, and not anticipating that and kind of, I just think there's one more participant. Let me admit them. Not anticipating what's going to go wrong, and not surviving is very large. In other words, if you see a source of food, or you see something that you like and you don't act upon it, that's not a big deal. But if you miss the trick in terms of understanding the patterns of predators or looking out for predators, you'll never be able to eat again. And so over these thousands of generations, what happened is that our brain has literally wired itself for negativity, and we're having this incredible negative bias that makes it very hard for us to be grateful. Most of the time we're suspicious, and most of the time we tend to go into the complaining side of ourselves, right? And so we want to sort of learn how to work with that if we want to develop a gratefulness practice. The other interesting side is, if you look at our history, is that you can start to see that gratitude, as this particular German sociologist said, Joel Simon, said, gratitude is the moral memory of mankind. So what research suggests is that the reasons why we have gratitude circuits, so to speak, and we have this interactive, interconnected parts of our being, the way that we relate to other people and want to reciprocate kindness, is because it actually helps the tribe to survive, right? So if I'm nice to you and you're nice to me, there's more chance that we'll help each other, and therefore there's more chance that we'll survive together, right? So even though we generally wired for negativity, we also have the wiring for gratitude and kindness and compassion. To give you another example of some research, the recent interesting research, they looked at people's brain when they were looking at pictures of a conflict. So this was done in Israel. They've taken Palestinian and Israeli children, teenagers, and they showed them picture of suffering from the conflict, like some strife for whatever reason of both sides. And what they've seen in their brain, interestingly, is that the first thing that lighted up in their brains was the center of compassion. In other words, when you see another human being in trouble, your automatic result or your automatic response, as far as your brain is wired, is to respond with kindness, to respond with compassion to that. Half a second later, the higher faculties of processing what was the photo about, and therefore understanding whether this was my people or the other side, kicks in. And if it was the other side, it switches off the center of compassion. So we wired to kind of, wanting to look after people, wanting to be thankful and grateful for other people, but we have survival mechanism that overrides them. That's sort of what comes out of the research. If we want to actually look at specifically at gratitude, Professor Robert Emmons considered sort of like the world authority in that. And he calls it a relationship to strengthen emotion, right? We confirm, we affirm that there are good things in the world, right? And we recognize that the sources of goodness is outside of ourselves. So again, this relationship with the outside that's coming through. And again, if you start to sort of unpack the research, you see that the activated parts of the brains that are involved with gratitude are those that have to do with feeling of reward, but specifically when stress is removed. So this kind of relieved reward and positive social interaction. And it also introduced, there is a surge in all the feel-good chemicals like dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and so on. So there is, again, like there's a real physical, biological, neurological mechanism in the brains for gratitude. They've done some interesting experiment in the Greater Good Science Center, which is Berkeley University in the US, where they got people to write gratitude letters for months, for 3 or 4 months. And they looked at what's going on with their brain, and they asked them some qualitative questions along that. And what they find is that, and that's an interesting point for us in terms of practice, they find that it's not necessarily that you say good things that increase, that creates a happier outlook for you, or that's helpful to you in terms of how you feel about life, but it's actually because that practice reduces that innate default negativity that we talked about, right? So gratitude is almost like a remedy for our inbuilt negative patterns. And because we reduce negativity, that's where it starts to be useful, right? It's helpful, even though it is a relational model, as we said, you're grateful to others, you're grateful to the outside. It doesn't really matter if you express it as such. It's enough if you express it just to yourself in terms of how you work with it. It does have lasting effects on our brain. So you can see the results in the way that the brain is wired. And we'll talk more about that. and it takes time, and this is really important, right? Like you can't just do, you know, affirmations or you know, some sort of a journaling for a week and expect by magic to sort of change your outlook over life, right? Something that we have to sort of keep practicing. But overall, it does have a lot of value in that sense, right? There's more satisfaction with life. Believe it or not, we can become less materialistic, or we're just grateful for, as a lot of people have pointed out in their sharing, a lot, you know, less materialistic, less likely to experience burnout, feel physically better, strengthen relationship, and so on, right? And so let's go back to the next Mentimeter. I'll just open it up. And what I ask you to do in this case is, you know, just vote for what is your state of gratefulness, so to speak. Where are you with your gratefulness? If you reflect about what you do in your own life and notice the tendency to kind of, this is where the mindfulness come in, notice the tendency to kind of think, oh, you know, I want to look good here, right? That's part of how we wired. But because this is anonymous, it doesn't really matter, and it will be really useful for us as a group to see where we're at, right? So just vote for one of those, and I would ask for everyone pretty much to participate, because the more we have in terms of samples, the better. So we need about 12 votes on this.
And I'll just let people know, if you weren't here previously, the address, the web address is in the chat. So it's www.mentee.com. And on that website, there's a little thing that you can post that number in, which is 716-1958, which is the code, and that will bring up the questions, and it should be the second question.
Yeah, you'll go straight to the second question if you miss the first one, and the number is here at the top as well. Few more people. You can see my screen, right, Kate?
I can't see your screen at the moment, no.
Oh, that's not very helpful. Sorry about that. Here we go. So you should be able to start seeing results. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. It's taken me a painful lesson to understand that when I switch screens or program, even if I share my screen, it doesn't go to the next one. There's something in Zoom there that I haven't learned yet to do. Oh, it just doesn't do it. So we got 6 people voted, which means that we should have another, at least another 6 or 7 people. Nope, no one wants to jump in. Okay. Oh, here we go. Okay. So we got half of the group have voted. The results are fairly typical. So when I run this before, I usually get, you know, no one goes to the extreme. So no one is, you know, I called it winning, an ongoing winning an Oscar ceremony. You're not completely in, you know, sort of just being, and thank you speeches the whole time. And no one usually is curled up in a ball, right? Sometimes we get people who felt that they used to be more grateful as a child, and now they're kind of like harden up, so to speak. And again, interesting for us in terms of looking at the research, right? One of the things you'll find is that as children, we laugh and smile up to 400 times a day, right? Anyone wants to guess how many times do we do it as adults on average?
I'm going to venture a guess at half that amount.
Okay, anyone else?
And if anyone would like, and you don't know how to turn your sound on, just raise your hand and I'll come and do it.
Okay, we'll move on. But basically, the research suggests between 20 on average and up to 40 or 50 for happy people, which is kind of like something has gone horribly wrong, you know, in a sense. Like if we lose that much, you know, the factor of our happiness just drops down by that much. Maybe what we're doing with our life in terms of how we define success, because there's a lot of people who are successful in that sense, and certainly for us here in Australia, I think, you know, compared to a lot of the places on the planet, you know, we are the lucky country, so to speak. We cannot complain. That's an interesting sort of and quite sobering statistic. Kate, what's next on our list in terms of exploration?
Yeah, I guess we wanted to touch on the connection between gratitude and mindfulness.
Yeah, right, that's right. So what I want to do is oh, there's still people coming in. Right, sorry. So for Suki and Laura who just joined us, sorry, you missed a little bit. I'm just going to very, very quickly summarize. We looked at gratitude in terms of what is it, like how do we look at gratitude, what is the definition, and we explore some of the science. I won't repeat it, but in a nutshell, gratitude is a relationship with outside, right? We're thankful for things in our life. We're appreciating things that happens to us and whatnot. And what we explore now at the moment, we're going to go into the connection between gratitude and mindfulness, which is a very strong connection, and then we'll turn it into practice, okay? So I'll share my screen again. Oh, sorry, any questions so far? Anyone? All good? Okay. Then I'll share my screen again and we'll dive into it. Can you see my screen? Okay. Right. So we want to look at a connection with mindfulness. What's interesting is, of course, that we kind of need to understand what mindfulness is. And mindfulness has been such a buzzword in recent times. Pretty much in the last 10 years, mindfulness, you find it everywhere. You know, mindfulness in business, mindfulness in childcare. One of my teachers used to joke mindfulness in pest control. So it's just, you know, it's definitely taken on, and that's not a bad thing necessarily, but I just think that a lot of people project things onto mindfulness, and I want to be a little bit clear. For example, there's some unrealistic expectation that mindfulness is this thing that you have to sit on the cushion and for a long time, right? Like you have to daily sit on the cushion for an hour or more, or even more bizarrely, you know, you have to get into sort of this kind of contorting position in order to sort of be able to do it, and so on, right? But really, if you just want to get to the, you know, the basement line of what is mindfulness, it's basically being aware of what is happening right now. And research suggests that we only aware of about 5% of the time. So 95% of the time, we completely in our unconscious or subconscious, we kind of run ourselves on automatic pilot, and we lose the ability to sort of be present with what's going on because we spend a lot of time in our head, right? And so even though your body is present, what you'll notice when you start to reflect on your thoughts, you'll realize that you spend a lot of time about what's have gone in the past, especially what have gone wrong. And you spend a lot of time about what's going to go into the future. And, you know, as again, quite often contemplating how do you protect yourself from what might go wrong, or, you know, all the stuff that you wish that would happen, right? So this inability for us to stay in the present moment creates a lot of the angst in our life, right? Sharon Salzberg says it very nicely in the sense that she points out it's not so that it's very difficult in terms of actually being aware right now. You just need to, for example, be present with your breath. If you just tune into your breath, you'll realize that you're present already, right? But the problem is that we don't remember to do that. In other words, we don't have the triggers and the mechanisms to remind us to kind of be present with our breath, with the experience that we have. And gratitude is a great way to to engage with that, because there's actually something to focus on while we're trying to be present. So there's a good connection there, and we'll explore it more. I also want to point out that if you look at the textbook definition, John Kabat-Zinn, who developed a mindfulness-based stress reduction model and kind of took it out of a religious Eastern philosophy connotation and just made it mainstream, he says paying attention to the present moment with intention. There's not just that you pay attention to what's going on, but there is a certain intention in there. And I think the intention is where the gratitude can come in as a filler, and we'll talk more about that, right? But basically, while you do that, you let go of judgment. And if you tune into the judgment part, what you realize is the judgment very much is what takes you out of the present moment, because you got to compare. In order to be able to judge, you got to compare to someone, or you got to compare to a past experience. Okay, there's no more people waiting. And so another way to look at about gratitude is in a sense almost like an adaptable technology, right? It's a resource that is asking to be expressed. There is an opportunity for you to layer into your daily life and daily routine this engagement. And the beauty of it, the reason why I call it an adaptable technology, is because you can do it with anything. Depends on, it doesn't matter where you live and how you live, right? You can do it with anything, provided you pay the attention to start to be grateful and thankful for certain things. And it's asking to be expressed, because if you go back to that point I made about how the brain is wired to be compassionate, it's wired to be good, it's wired to be happy, and we kind of lose that trick when we grow up, and we sort of, it's still there trying to be expressed, right? And so what we're going to do now is we're actually going to go into breakout rooms. I'll assign you into maybe 3 people in a breakout, and I'll ask you to kind of share with each other, what is it in your life that you could be more grateful for, right? What is it that is there in your life, and maybe you just take it for granted, or maybe you don't, but you could be more practicing in your grateful. And we'll do that for about, how are we doing for time? Let me just see. Yeah, we got about, I think, 10 minutes. So 3 or 4 minutes each. And at the end of it, what I'll do is I'll open the next slide on the Mentimeter. And if I'll show you what that is. The next slide will allow you to kind of rate things that you're grateful for, right? So once you finish the discussion, go into your Mentimeter, and what you can do with those, you can move them up and down as what is important for you, so to speak. And again, you can do more than one. Those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, the details on how to get to that tool are in the chat box, and don't hesitate to send me a message personally. But is everyone clear what we're doing? Yeah? Break down in group and ask each other, share a little bit about what could you be more grateful for, okay? And I'll let you know when, just 3 or 4 minutes, I'll let you know when we about 2 minutes out of coming back to the question, yeah? So if we got 12 people, I think we need 4 rooms. And I'll jump in and out of rooms as needed. Kate, you happy to participate?
Yes, please.
Okay, here we go. You can vote for more than one. But if so just if you want to rate where you're at with those, then let's see what's the group. So where's the group at? No wonder the travel adventures and experiences are not getting much result at the moment, right? There isn't a lot of that happening. Maybe I should have put that one in the past, right? Yeah. Okay, maybe 1 or 2 more people. And what's interesting with this slide, and this sort of came up before, is that we tend to take the things that are the most important kind of for granted, right? And so obviously connections and our space are very important. They're the bottom part of the Maslow hierarchy, and we could be more grateful quite often. We just tend to assume that they're given. I've seen life basic necessities go up, and that's usually in countries that are developing countries. So poorer countries tend to vote that higher. But of course, for us, it's kind of like, yeah, it's always there, right? Okay, let's stop that. And okay, any questions so far? How are you doing in terms of the information? All good? Okay.
Yeah.
So
Good.
shall we explore the last one?
Yeah, please. So, how do we build a gratitude practice?
Okay, lovely. So again, I'll go back to my slide for this one. And for this, I want to point out a couple of more pieces in terms of like our understanding, or this is you know, in the short time that we have in this session, it's quite hard to explore it in depth and really sort of, you know, help you to build your own practice. But I want to point out some conceptual framework that will allow you to understand what's going on, and then will allow you to move from that into practice. And one of the reasons that most of us are unhappy is because we argue with reality. In other words, there's a gap in the experience between what we want and what presents itself. And a lot of the angst in our life, if you tune into or start to reflect about what's going on in your own head, is because there is stuff that we just don't like, or we try to manipulate, we try to change it. There's nothing wrong with that. In a sense, you know, like the fact we have air conditioning and lighting and lighting in the house and cars to move around is because we weren't happy with what we had, right? But there is a big difference between kind of thinking, okay, there's something that doesn't work for me as best as it could and I want to change it, and being depressed or upset about stuff that doesn't seem to be presenting itself, right? And what you'll find is that a lot of that angst is not even the actual what's going on, it's the fact that we're very attached to the result of how, you know, how we wanted things to go on. And this gives us a place of exploration in terms of what we do in our heads about it. And the biggest, you know, the biggest fallacy in our life is this idea that we have control over things, and we can do that. And if you had any, you know, if you thought that that was the case, I'm pretty sure that the last 6 months proved to all of us that we actually have very little control about what's going on. And it's enough, you know, if one little wildlife animal from a market in China can shut down the world, I think that's pretty clear that we don't have a lot of control, right? And so if we're not in control of what's going on, then we need to look over the stuff that is out of, you know, that is in our control. And that goes back very much to the way that we work with our thinking, the way that we work with our thoughts and our mind. And in that sense, what we want is, we want to develop this kind of mind fitness. And so what I'd like to suggest is that very much gratitude is an exercise in mind fitness. And if you look at general exercise, what stress is doing there, measured stress creates more muscles. It's the same in this sort of sense for us, in terms of how we learn to become more resilient, how we learn to become more grateful, you know, seeing stress in that sense in our life as a practice, and actually looking for places where we can be grateful for those stresses, because they allow us to increase our, you know, capacity to deal with stuff. They allow us to deal with crisis better, right? Like, can we be grateful for the opportunity to practice when we're not happy? Can we find a modicum of gratefulness for experiences that are uncomfortable, because somewhere along the line they'll also make us bigger, right? And the main tool that we need for that is what's called neuroplasticity, right? And that is a fascinating feature of the brain. So you see, until they had MRI, science was very much in the opinion that the brain forms as we grow up, but by the time you get to the mid-20s, that's it. It doesn't form up anymore, right? It actually starts to shrink in size. You lose about 10,000 cells a day. And so because they could detect the fact that brains are becoming very little, but by very small percentages smaller, they thought that that's it, that the brain doesn't actually change and grow. And of course, once the MRI came on board, they realized that that's not the case. The brain continuously rewired itself, depends on what you do. So if you always do the stuff that you've always done, there's no rewiring, because the patterns are there. right? But if you want to change, you need to rewire your brain. And this is where neuroplasticity comes in. And for us, in terms of developing a gratitude practice, we want to look at a whole cluster of practices called positive neuroplasticity, right? We want to kind of move from the element of just being lucky enough to have a good experience into, or be grateful for a good experience, to actually cultivate an inner narrative that is a grateful, grateful for living, grateful for being, grateful for eating, and so on and so forth. And so this is where we have a lot of place to author our inner narrative, right? Another way to sort of frame this or look at it is that, in a sense, every given moment, right, that moment is a gift, right? It's given, right? And so we don't know what's arriving in the next moment. Like, there's not much that we know about, like we can plan, and usually, quite often plans can work. But there is never, every time you went out of your house and you had a plan and it didn't work, it didn't work not because you didn't plan for it. It didn't work because there was stuff that you didn't plan for that happened and you didn't know about it, right? So if you switch that the other way around, there's also all the opportunities that can unfold in any given moment if you change the way that you work with what things are. If you allow yourself a menu of relaxed kind of interaction with what's going on and looking for the opportunities to change. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to stop share. I wanted the next slide. Another concept that we want to explore when we build practice is this idea that, we forget to be grateful for what is there, what opportunities we miss, because we miss this change that we can continuously bring into our life, where we become more grateful, we become happier about what we have, we tend to rewire our brain into, having a more positive outlook about what's going on. So this idea that the mind, the way that the mind thinks, rewire the brain, but if you rewire the brain, that changes the way that your mind works as well, right? And I like this quote by Eleanor Roosevelt, where she reiterated, we call it a present because it's a gift. It's a time for us to do something with what's going on. And another element that we should bring into our thinking is this idea that, it's not that happiness makes us grateful, but it's the other way around. If we continuously practice gratefulness, that will bring more happiness into our life, because, as you said in the first slide, as you saw, a lot of people said, I'm happy, I'm happy for what I have, right? If you're happy for what you have, you become happier in general. And again, in this context, I like what Ford said, which is whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So there's a lot of it, a lot of it is in the way that we think about what's possible for us. And last but not least, right, this element that is so important for our, the evolution of our current time and where we're going to go in terms of geopolitics, our relationship with the environment and whatnot, is when we are grateful, we're not fearful. And when we're not fearful, we literally cannot sort of walk into violence. So every time we act violently, that's underneath the baseline of it, is there is a fear of survival. And practicing gratefulness kind of shift the dial on our capacity and tendency to be fearful as it rewires your brain, right? So how do we do it, right? What can we do on the day-to-day sort of practice? And these are simple stuff, like how find ways to be more present, right? Spend some time in nature. Look over the horizon is an interesting one, because if you think about it, if you're in fear, fight, flight, if you're fighting for your life, again, this zebra on the savannah type stuff, right? There's no way that you can sort of just relax and look up at the sky, look up at the trees. And that, as soon as you do that, your nerve system switch back into rest and digest mode. So you actually can kickstart your nerve system to be more relaxed and more happy just by doing that sort of stuff, right? Journaling is super important. What you do and what you say, what you write, what you think, all this language in your head creates your reality. They've done some fascinating research, I think in Duke University, where they were giving some students had to walk into a room, read some script, like half a page, then put together some gadget and then walk out of the room. And the student thought that the experiment was about the speed in which they put the gadget. But what the professor was actually looking at is the relationship between the language in the script that they read and the way that they walk. So what he discovered is that when they were giving them scripts about aging and death, they shuffled out of the room, even though it was 20 minutes after, because they were doing the gadget in between, right? So continuously look for ways to understand the language in your head and see what you change. There was a beautiful point that Mon mentioned before, and I think that's the next slide, and that she suggested that you can change sentences like I should to I get to, right? And so still stuff that you could be doing and it's better for you to do, but you look at it as the opportunity to do something rather than you must do something. So you take agency, you become more empowered by doing that. It's very much a heart and mind thing, right? It's not just about the language, it's about the way that you work with your heart. Tune into that natural tendency to be compassionate, to be kind, and you will find that you'll have more opportunities to be grateful for. And last but not least, I want to mention we have on the call here Maurice, who developed this beautiful little app. It's called jujuapp.io. I'm just looking at time. I wonder if we have, yeah, we just got, Maurice, you want to, for 2 minutes, just to say what the app does? Because it's really lovely. I've been trying it.
Oh, wow, Michael. I did not expect that. Thank you. Well, look, just really quickly, the goal of the app, there's two sides. One is to make it a bit easier to express your gratitude digitally. So whether that's sending it to someone, whether that is appreciating a certain company, it's just a way to document your gratitude. But the other and more exciting thing about it is because it's digital and because you can share it with other people, you can see what everyone else is appreciating as well. And you can get inspired by that. And we do know that we are very social creatures. And when we see everyone else doing something, we're much more likely to do it. So we're really using the digital aspect to make appreciation and gratitude a norm for you and for more people. Yeah, that's probably a very quick intro. Thank you, Michael.
No, thank you. It's a fantastic little app. And something about seeing other people, right? We forget again, like we're not meant to live in this isolated, fractured sort of social circles that we tend to kind of be in. And if we're lucky, we have some social support and some circles. But if you think about how we were wired for, we were wired to know the same people from the day we born to the day we die. We were wired to sit every night together with the fire, around the fire, with the older people, the oldest people and the youngest people, and sit together and share what happened to us during the day and laugh and tell stories. And, that sort of aspect of our life that was continuously reverberating with gratitude to each other as we share these good times, that's gone. And we have to look for ways to sort of recreate it, right? And I also want to point out one last interesting sort of bit in this, and that is that that once you get to know something, it's very hard to put it in the box, right? So Sheryl Sandberg said, we cannot change what we're not aware of, but once we're aware of, we cannot help but change. If you put your mind, right, to discover the place that you forget to remember what Sharon Salzberg said, mindfulness is easy, gratitude is easy, you just have to remember to do it, right? Once you sort of realize that you forgot, that you don't have the time or the practice to do that, if you put your mind to it, you cannot help by changing. You cannot help by sort of bringing more into your life in terms of gratefulness and appreciating. And the last piece I really want to sort of throw in there, because it's really quite important, is that because of the way that our culture is, we tend to think, in extremes, and we tend to, this idea of practice make perfect. I just want to tone it down a bit, right? We'll never be perfect, but we can get progress if we stick to practice, right? So instead of practice makes perfect, if you can just go into, I'm going to progress with it. I'm going to become a little bit more grateful. Over time, I'm going to increase gratefulness and happiness in my life through practice and whatnot, right? I won't have time to talk to that, so I won't get into this. But as final sort of couple of minutes, I want to know if you have any questions or anything you want to share in this context. Yes, Maurice.
Yeah, so thank you for the great session today. It was good just to review a lot of the content. One of the things that I recently started thinking a lot of, and it's funny that you use that definition for gratitude, because I use the same one. And what I really like about that one is that it ends with a desire to return kindness. And so I just wanted to ask you about how you see that being created in the world, right? One thing is to say thank you, is to be grateful, but how does that emotion, how does that new state of being convert into further kindness, right? Or giving back in some way. So I just wanted to see your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful question. Thank you. Couple of points that's relevant to this, right? The first is that kindness, and in that sense, gratitude, although gratitude is more kind of almost like the outcome if you be kind, if you do those practices. Kindness belongs to this very special cluster of practices that tends to grow as you do it. Right? In order to be more trusting, you need to start trusting. In order to be kind, you need to be kind. You know, so it's those practices where you almost have to take a leap of faith rather than just, you know, we're waiting for the validity. Oh, you know, when that happens, then I can be kind. That doesn't work like that, right? You have to sort of venture out yourself. And it's those places where we're in the unknown, right? Where the magic in our life happens. You know, if we always just stay in what's comfortable and what's known, yeah, we'll still, you know, we might have a good life in that sense. I'm not saying that that necessarily robs you from the ability to live a good life, but the places where we grow, the places where we stretch, the places where we feel ourselves, you know, on purpose and in a way allow ourselves to venture into, you know, new areas and new hopes and new dimensions in our life, happens when we take that leap of faith. And that leap of faith is driven, you know, by positive psychology. It cannot come out of fear. It cannot come out of anger. It cannot come out of sadness. Grief sometimes does it, because grief is this kind of strange place where we get expanded even though it hurts, right? But by and large, most of the, you know, sort of daily emotions that we go through are kind of contracting. And we want to sort of expand. And the opportunities through kindness is for us to expand. So that's the first thing, right? The second thing is that we forget, I think, that we can be kind in a society that's very affluent because everyone else is kind of okay, right? And what's interesting for us, I think, in Australia is that we're moving into a phase in our cultural and social sort of connections where we realize that that assumption is false, is just given to us because we have, you know, our little boxes and our little separate sort of enclaves of comfort, and we don't see the other side. We don't see the other side that suffer. And it comes through the statistics that you look at. You know, you look at domestic violence, right? You look at the fact that I think roughly now about 1/3 of the children in Australia live under the poverty line, all that sort of stuff, right? So I guess when you're out in the developing world, I've done a lot of work in aid and development in Asia, for example, in some of the poorest countries in the region. And you know what's real and what's not real for those people. But I think in Australia, sometimes we tend to forget it because we don't see it on the television. And unless you happen to live next to you know, a really poor family, it just doesn't come to you, right? And so I think there is an invitation for us to look for opportunities to be kind in that social environment, in that domain, because we need more of it, right? We want, you know, I'm an immigrant to this country and I feel so lucky to have come here because compared to where I grew up, this is such a heaven. But sometimes I feel we waste our opportunity, right? Like we just take it for granted too easily. I don't know if that's answer your question, but that's...
No, it does. And it's definitely explored it a little bit more. And yeah, it's this, you know, especially on that second point, when kindness can come in many forms, right? It's not just giving to charity. It's not just helping someone out. A smile to a stranger. Right. You don't really know where that's going to go, right? That person could have had this worst day. And I've had this happen where I walk, you know, going on my walk, I'm not feeling great. And a random stranger smiles at me. Yeah. All of a sudden I feel better and I'm ready now to return kindness in some other way, right? Or much
Yeah.
more likely. And I think
Yeah.
it's just a super powerful part of it that I think gets left out quite often. And I think it's something that really needs, because as well, when we then do that from that space of gratitude, it solidifies our feelings and emotions around it. So yeah, thank you for that.
Absolutely. I'm aware that we're running out of time, but I do want to honor any other questions. So anyone else wants to ask anything?
I just have one very quick question, Michael. You mentioned before that if we adopt a regular gratitude practice, we can actually get to a point where we start to rewire our own brains and have more of that gratitude bias rather than negativity bias. Does the research have anything to say on how long that process typically takes? I mean, I imagine there's huge interpersonal variation, you know, but is there any kind of guiding principle on how long that should take?
There is a lot of research on habits, right? And so I don't know specifically about gratitude as a habit, but I can tell you in terms of the research on habit, if you look online, the magical number of 21 days comes up a lot, right? But unfortunately, that number is based on a very small sample on, you know, specific research that was done, and it's not definitive. What seems to be the more recent and kind of learned opinion is that it takes 66 days on average to create a new habit, right? To really rewire your brain. And that average is, you know, anything between 30 and 90 or whatever it is. I think even more, 187 was the top sample of that research. But basically, if you think about 2.5 months as a guideline for a practice to sort of settle in, that's a good start, right?
Okay,
and,
great.
And when do you know that it becomes a habit? When you don't have to cue it so much to, you know, like originally, in order for us to get into a habit, we need to cue it. It needs to be something that reminds us, like Sharon Salzberg said, how do I remember, right? So you need, you know, whether it's a note on your computer to take a deep breath and be thankful, right? Or whatever it is that you use, right? Over time, it just becomes like brushing your teeth. You don't need to think about it in the morning. You don't think, oh, I better brush my teeth. You just get up and you go and do it, right? So that's where that is, yeah?
I guess part B of that question is, are we assuming that it always needs to be done consciously, or is the assumption that if you do it enough, it can almost become automatic so that you don't have to sit down with your journal and think, right, now I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes being grateful for my 3 things? Like, does it have, can you get beyond that?
Yeah. No, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. So nerves that fire together wire together, right? So your mind, in the way that you think about stuff, right, over time reshapes the way your brain is wired. But because now your brain is rewired for that, it shapes the way you think. So the mind shapes the brain, and the brain shapes the mind, right? And so definitely over time, if you hold on to that practice regularly enough, what you'll find is that you just tend to find the more positive stuff in your experiences. You know, you just tend to look at, you know, what's the half full cup rather than a half empty cup, right? And because of that, you're like, okay, like, that's great. It's all going, you know, like, so there's definitely an impact in terms of like moving from an unconscious to conscious and back to unconscious. A little bit like when you learn to drive a car, right? Like at the beginning, you don't know how to drive, and then you realize you don't know how to drive, and then you learn to drive, which is when you know to know, you know that you know, right? But then eventually you can drive all the way from home to work and back, and unless there is something on the road, how many of us have done it where we drive and we're not in the car? You know, we're somewhere in our head, right? So it definitely can become more of a you know, sort of an unconscious practice over time. If you want to go to the last slide, the last Mentimeter slide just allowed you to kind of like give us some idea on how did you find the material. And also, if you want to know more about positive neuroplasticity in general, I'll put my email in the chat. Where is it? Chat room. And by all means, email me or contact me through my website, which I think is on the event page.
Yeah, and I will follow up for everyone that registered for this event with Michael's details, as well as the details of Maurice's app, Juju. if anyone wants to join, because I definitely will. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad. It looks like you find the material useful for practice, and maybe a couple of people would like to do some more. Generally, look, I honestly want to share this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a rocket science, right? If you spend more time paying attention to think positively over time, your outlook on life will be more positive. That's what it boils down to, right? And so that doesn't mean that life doesn't fall apart every now and then. It does, right? But your ability to rock with that, your ability to deal with those moments actually becomes more extended. You know, like you're less ruffled by things that fall apart, because overall you know that, okay, I'll be able to deal with it. Or you get a sense, or you get a certain kind of inner resilience in you just by being more grateful and more positive.
Beautiful. Thank you
Okay.
so
Thank
much,
you.
Michael. And thank you guys for
Appreciate
joining in. And for those whose faces we can't see, thanks for watching. And I hope everybody has a wonderful day, and see you all again online soon.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Bye.